Hi, I'm Bill Bentley. My wife, Ann Wilhelm, and I are going to talk about how silvopasture and other agroforestry practices fit into forest and farm ownerships in Connecticut and southern New England. We'll also talk about the Conservation Innovation Grant project on our farm, which is partially funded by the Connecticut office of the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. Our project is focused more on outreach and social sciences than is typical for an NRCS Conservation Innovation Grant or SIG funding. To begin with, we will describe the audiences for our project, which includes thousands of small farm and forest owners in Connecticut and southern New England, as well as collaborative agencies and organizations that have endorsed our project. The goals and values of these different ownership audiences reflect their perspectives on social, environmental, and economic values. We'll explore how silvopasture and other agroforestry technologies can help owners of small landholdings achieve their goals. Our project activities focus on materials of use to our audiences. Web pages, videos, fact sheets, and other materials will help them decide which agroforestry practices apply to their situations and help them achieve their goals in land ownership. So what are the characteristics of land ownership in Connecticut, and what will different ownership audiences need to know about silvopasture and other agroforestry practices? The National Agricultural Census and the National Forest Inventory cannot easily be combined because they use different acreage cutoffs for the smallest units. The Ag Census treats anything as small as an acre as a farm, if that's the reported use of that acre. The Forest Inventory's smallest unit is 10 acres of forest trees. Fortunately, Mary Terrell, Yale, and Brett Butler, Forest Service Family Forestry Research Unit at Amherst, Massachusetts, worked together to gather data in Connecticut on forested ownerships as small as 1 acre. While there are 17,000 forest owners of parcels 10 acres or more in size, the more refined measure of woodlands adds another 122,000 forest owners, for a total of nearly 139,000 owners. Using parcel sizes that are the same as the USDA Agricultural Census standards paints quite a different picture of forest ownership in the state. It's astonishing to realize that the owners of small forest parcels of 1 to 9 acres make up the large majority of Connecticut's forest owners. In aggregate, these small owners own about 1/3 of Connecticut's private forest land. It's important to acknowledge the owners of these small forest parcels. First and foremost, these small parcels of forest still provide a range of critical environmental services to their local communities and to the region, particularly when these smaller parcels abut one another. To ignore these small forest parcels increases the risk that there will be a gradual loss of biodiversity, forest structure, and ecological functions. It's also important to recognize these owners because historically they've been underserved in terms of cooperative extension or service forestry personnel. They are often ignored by other agencies, which probably leads to reduced public benefits. It's also interesting to note that this small, densely populated state of Connecticut is 60% forested. There are far fewer farm owners, about 6,000 in total, compared to 139,000 forest owners, but the average farm size is 73 acres, while the average forest parcel is just over 6 acres. We think many of the owners of smaller farms and forests are candidates for information about silvopasture and other agroforestry practices. The purpose of our SIG project is to demonstrate and promote this information to owners of small landholdings. In her study, Mary Terrell identified 4 groupings of forest owners in Connecticut. These groupings are based on the economic benefits and the amenity values owners identified as being important in their survey responses. Woodland retreat, owners seeking quiet, closeness to nature, sustainability of their landscape, and greater tranquility than available in more urban environs. Working the land folks, sometimes called homesteaders. These families are living and working on their land, but usually have external income. Non-resident owners, though often viewed negatively at the national level, in Connecticut a high percentage of these non-resident owners are quite involved in their land, much like the woodland retreaters. Commercial operations, a mix of crops, livestock, and forest products is highly variable, but the defining characteristic is they depend on their bottom line being positive. Each of the four groups has a perspective on amenity values versus economic benefits. The differences, however, are not as striking as they may at first appear. All owners have economic concerns and opportunity costs. Owners in each audience will do informal benefit cost analyses regarding their continued ownership and investments in management. The benefits considered in the analysis may be in dollars, but also include amenities and social values that are difficult to put a monetary value on. For example, a quiet natural setting, environmental stewardship and conservation, community leadership, water quality protection, carbon sequestration, and climate change mitigation. When we talk about sustainability, we are talking about how to meet today's needs without compromising the ability of the future to meet their needs. In context of environmental sustainability, this boils down to the interdependence of three critical dimensions: environmental, social, economic. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency represents these dimensions using nested circles. The large outer circle is the environment. The idea conveyed in this graphic is that a resilient and robust economy exists within a healthy society, and a healthy society is dependent on intact and functional environment. This representation may be useful for arguing about how environmental policy should shape social and economic behaviors, be those at the local, regional, national, or even international levels, to achieve desired goals of environmental protection. However, at the family ownership level, we think these three values are considered simultaneously. The focus is on trade-offs. What is given up to get more of another value? When owners contemplate land use alternatives, they must assess the trade-offs among these values. Some illustrations of trade-offs are current cash flows versus long-term present net worth, benefits that accrue to the public good, like improved water quality, versus benefits that accrue to the family through the sale of timber, minerals, or the land itself, community participation and leadership versus time devoted to family and farm enterprises. The balance reached by any landowning family is highly individual. The balance that is struck must be comfortable and sustainable for the family. The balance must reflect the specific goals and values of the family, as well as the human, capital, and natural resources available to them.
So let's look now at how these three dimensions play out on a farm that Bill and I own. Bill and I own 46 acres in North Granby, Connecticut. The tillable portion of the land is on the fringe of the rich soils of the Connecticut River Valley, but the majority of the land is sloped and rocky. This is particularly true of the rear forested portion, where the uplift to the Berkshire Mountains begins and where there are significant outcroppings of granitic rock. A woodland stream bisects our woods. It's a beautiful property, but its value is marginal in terms of agricultural productivity. The farm has always operated as a homestead or subsistence farm that provided food, wood, and some items for cash sale or for barter. It's never been a commercial enterprise. In this broad sense, Wilhelm Farm is like thousands of other small farms in Connecticut and New England. The original farm was established around 1820. My grandparents purchased the farm in 1936. One of the first things my grandfather did on the land was to plant white pines on what was a marginal upland pasture. And what impresses me when I reflect on this action is that he recognized he did not have to continue with the existing use of the land. My grandfather grew up in Germany, where he had observed managed forests, so he understood forestry as an alternative land use to farming, and that planting trees yields benefits that extend into the future. At the death of my grandparents, my parents bought out my uncle's share of the property and moved their growing family to the farm. My parents always had a large garden and raised livestock while I was growing up, but they depended financially on off-farm incomes. The farm provided food for both our own large family and my uncle's family. My parents sold strawberries for cash from a card table set up by the road, and later on sold vegetables at a local farmer's market. They kept a flock of laying hens and sold eggs. They kept a few beef animals of various ages and a milk cow or two. They also raised a couple of pigs each year. They had various arrangements with the neighbors over the years to get the hay baled, animals butchered, and manure spread. My father also actively managed the forest. He hired a licensed forester to develop the first forest management plan written for the property. He removed the poorer quality hardwoods, and we heated our house with wood. He valued the diversity of birds and wildlife on the property and participated in the Coverts project. In the early 1990s, he and my mother donated the development rights to the farm to the local land trust, ensuring that this property would never be developed or subdivided. In 1990, Bill and I returned to Granby. I was interested in market gardening, and I opened a roadside stand to sell vegetables and small fruits. This is also the period when we raised our family. During the first half of this time, I was an at-home parent, but about halfway through, Bill and I switched roles as to who was earning an off-farm income and who was at home taking care of the farm and the household. There was an opportunity cost incurred by our choice to replace an off-farm income with the much smaller revenue provided by the farm stand, but there were also significant benefits. The value of some of these benefits can be estimated in dollars, but many are intangible. Daycare and commuting are both significant expenses that we avoided by having one of us at home to tend to the farm and the children. We also saved on our grocery bills by eating and preserving food we had grown for ourselves. As our children grew old enough to become helpful, we paid them wages. This provided them with real work experiences, and it also allowed us to move money from the farm to their college savings accounts. This transference of money helped us from a tax perspective. Another tax advantage is that self-sufficiency is not taxable, while earned income is. There were also many intangible benefits, like the pleasure and peace of mind to have your children at home with you, the relationship that our children developed with their grandparents through daily interactions, our availability to provide support to my parents as they aged, the satisfaction of producing our own food and of building ties to the community and serving a community function. Even now, 5 years after we've closed the farm stand, people still miss it. We are now in a time of transition, both in our own lives and in the world around us. As we look to the future, we are developing plans for the farm and how the land will be used. Remember the analogy of the fox and the hedgehog? The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. An industrial-scale monoculture farmer is like the hedgehog, while the owner of a small farm or forest must think like a fox and be alert to both threats and opportunities. Bill and I must consider the resources we have available, as well as our financial and physical limitations. We are concerned about the health of local ecosystems and the impacts of climate change. How do we help both our farm and our community to become more resilient to the consequences of climate change? We need to think like foxes, and agroforestry practices fit well into this thinking, particularly as we contemplate how to increase the productivity of this farm. We first considered Silvopasture in 2013 as we planned for the third timber harvest of the white pine stand planted by my grandfather some 75 years earlier. There was an area of over 2 acres that the licensed forester was unable to inventory, noting in his report that the area was impenetrable due to the proliferation of invasive plants, brambles, wild grapes, etc. This area was not being actively managed, and it was neither part of the forest or the hay and pasture land. We are now actively converting this area into silvopasture, using goats to help clear and prepare the land. We have also planted hybrid poplars in an adjacent pasture that is frequently too wet to put animals on. Other agroforestry practices that we are working on or considering in the future include forest farming. I have grown mushrooms informally for the family for many years, but this would fit in well with our forest management plan, using trees that we're thinning from the forest anyway. I'm also trying to establish fiddlehead ferns, ramps, and investigating other edible or medicinal plants that we can grow in the forest understory. Riparian buffers, as we plan for the addition of ponds and ditches to manage high volumes of rain during extreme weather events and to retain that water for use during dry periods. Alley cropping. We're thinking about planting fruit or nut trees on the steeper portions of land that is currently hayed. And windbreaks. We need to plant windbreaks around the north side of our house, yard, and driveway to prevent drifting snows during the winter. Our biggest concerns as we sort through these future plans are, how do we generate annual revenue streams? And how do we structure enterprises like the market garden or tree crops in ways that encourage and allow room for others to participate? So why does the story of Wilhelm Farm matter? It's because our story is in no way unique. Our concern for the environment, our desire to continue a legacy of conservation and pass this on to our children, the financial obstacles we face to hold this land, and the physical obstacles of managing the land as we age. These goals and problems are shared by many others. Parcelization and fragmentation of the forest pose real threats. The sustainable provision of the social goods and services that forests provide depends on having a functional, intact forest landscape.
Coming back to our SIG project, effective outreach to landowners becomes more difficult as forests become more parcelized and fragmented. We saw this need and applied for a SIG grant. An application for a Conservation Innovation Grant requires identifying sponsors and obtaining letters of support from them. This dedicates support for the kind of work proposed, but it also establishes a support group for spreading the results. Early on, we visited with our NRCS and Forest Service collaborators and our 11 sponsors. They provided additional input on what was needed to make our project useful. We also held a tour where all the sponsors and collaborative agency professionals could see what we were doing and offer suggestions. In our final project year, we're making sure all of our sponsors and collaborators receive our results, talk with us, and visit the farm. Among our activities will be public meetings hosted around the state in NRCS field offices and debriefing sessions with our key individual collaborators. So here are our social media connections. We hope you will visit them and give us feedback. Let us know what you think. But we also hope that you will visit us in North Granby, Connecticut. We'd love to show you around on the ground and get your ideas and suggestions and feedback. Thank you so much for watching this presentation.